Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's daily quiz session with us. Before beginning, I would like to remind you about the Google form that we have attached in the description box of this video. The idea is to enable a one-on-one counseling session for you from our experts, and this could be a one-stop solution for all exam-related queries and problems, given that the UPSC Prelims exam is just few weeks away from now. So do fill up the form and let us reach out to you. And now let's see which questions do we have for analysis today. The first question of your screen talks about a new development in the field of astronomy. The question has been taken up in the light of an article in the Hindu that gives an exciting piece of evidence. This evidence says that extraterrestrial life could be possible. Now, a remote dream for most of us. NASA has in fact found evidence of a new planet that has been named now as TOI 715b. The unique thing about this planet is that found about 137 light years away from us, it is showing evidences of habitation, some form of life. There is also an evidence of liquid water existing on this planet. Apart from that, it has been found to be orbiting a tiny dwarf star, and it is taking about 19 days to finish one orbit. Now, this news indeed has sent ripples across to question whether there is life beyond Earth. And in this connection, we have the first question on your screen, which has three statements. The first statement talks about James Webb Space Telescope. It says that the James Webb Space Telescope was developed with international collaboration between NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. The first statement here is absolutely correct. Why? Because launched back in 2021, the James Webb Telescope was sent in the space to be an unique achievement in the field of infrared astronomy. It had a very high resolution, a very high sensitivity technique that would allow observing and mapping even the most faint and invisible and distant objects in the space. And therefore, the first statement becomes valid here. Talking about the second statement regarding the telescope, it says this telescope is situated at a point which is known as Sun-Earth L2 Lagrange point. Once again, this statement is correct because it is owing to its location at this spot that the Webb telescope has been able to keep a constant transmission from the planet, providing the details of everything that it is mapping up there. And let's also quickly understand what do we mean by the Lagrange point. Now, Lagrange points are sometimes also referred to as libration points. These are nothing but points of equilibrium. For small mass objects, tiny objects with huge mass, and these are existing under constant gravitational pull. Of at least two other orbiting bodies, massive orbiting bodies. So the second statement here is valid. Now let's talk about the third statement. It says this telescope has been designed to study the infrared light emitted by objects in the universe. Again, the statement is valid because the purpose behind the Webb telescope was to create such a high resolution infrared technique that could surpass its previous telescopes when it came to observing the faintest and the most invisible objects existing in the space. For example, for many, the Webb telescope was the immediate and the most potent successor of the Hubble telescope, which means that all three statements here are valid, making C your correct answer. And now let's proceed with our second question of the day. And this question is in reference to the Election Commission of India. Why is it suddenly so important? It is important in the wake of an Indian Express release which says that the Election Commission of India has expressed its zero tolerance attitude or zero tolerance policy towards using children for the purpose of election campaigns. Now, the ECI has also clearly specified that if adult members, if they want to campaign for political parties and the children are just present with their parents without taking an active participation in campaigning, that is allowed, that is fine, that will not attract any legal scrutiny. But in case children, paid or unpaid, are forcefully put for campaigning agenda of political parties, then this contributes to abuse of child rights. A very interesting development in the field of social justice and polity. And now let's see the three statements related to this question. Let's analyze which of these are valid. The first statement talks about Article 324 of the Indian Constitution provides for the appointment of an Election Commission of India to superintend, direct, regulate, control elections in India. It is a valid statement because ever since it was created back in 1950, the Election Commission of India under Article 324 of the Constitution has been working as a permanent constitutional body. What's the purpose? The purpose is to regulate, conduct, administer elections to the Parliament, which includes the Lok Sabha, the upper house Rajya Sabha, as well as to state legislative assemblies, including to the offices of the President and Vice President in India. So therefore, the first statement here becomes valid. Now let us also remember that back when it was created in 1950, since then until 1989, Election Commission of India worked as one member body. But things changed in 1989 as the voting age in India was reduced from 21 to 18 years for Indian citizens, which means that now the electorate was to become much more strong and big in size. To cope up with the extra work, in 1989, the Election Commission of India was expanded and then it was made a multi-member body. So the first statement is valid, and now to the second statement. It says Election Commission is also concerned with elections to panchayats and municipalities in the states. This statement is wrong because elections to panchayat and municipalities is not something that ECI takes care of. In fact, this is taken care of under the state election commissions, which were appointed via the 73rd and the 74th Amendment Acts of the Constitution back in 1992. The purpose was to conduct and regulate elections in various union territories and states for urban local bodies, including municipalities, including municipal corporations, as well as gram panchayats and other village panchayat institutions. So therefore, the second statement is wrong. Talking about the third statement, it again throws light on one of the duties of the Election Commission. It says Election Commission assigns, it gives symbols for the respective political parties who participate in the election. This again is a valid statement. So we can say that the first and the third statement only are correct, making C your right answer. In this regard, the third statement on your screen has been taken up in context of the G20 organization. But why has the G20 suddenly become prominent? Because of a release of the PIB, which talks about how India is participating in first G20 education working group that has been organized under Brazilian presidency. That's because 2024 is when Brazil will host the G20 forum. Back in 2023, India was hosting the G20, and a year before that, that's in 2022, it was Bali in Indonesia that was the host of the G20. Now, coming back to the question itself, the first statement says G20 presidency rotates once in 2 years among member states. This is a wrong statement because the G20, often referred to as the group of 20, which means a group of or an intergovernmental forum of 9 countries, including the European Union plus the African Union. It consists of the largest economies of the world, both industrialized as well as developing. The more interesting part regarding G20 is that created back in 1999, it today boasts of two-thirds of world population. It is representing more than two-thirds of global population, about more than 80% of gross world product and 75% of international trade. But let's remember that G20 operates without a permanent secretariat and it operates without a permanent staff. Therefore, its chair rotates every year from one member to another. And let's also remember that the chair is selected from different regional groupings of members. So therefore, the first statement is invalid. It is not once in 2 years. In fact, it's annually. Talking about the second statement, it says presidency of G20 is supported by a troika. A troika is like a trio, a group of 3 members, which comprises current member, immediate past member, and the future host countries. Indeed, that's true. And that's also the reason why India has been extending its complete cooperation to Brazil, because 2024, Brazil shall be the host of G20. So here we can say just the second statement is right and B is your correct answer. On that note, let's skip to question number 4. Why has this question been taken for analysis today? It pertains to the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of 17 goals or commitments, also called as global goals, initiated by the United Nations to achieve a more social, economic, just world by 2030. And in this regard, the news that has triggered the question comes from PIB. It pertains to social justice and it says that in New Delhi, the ULLAS, the Ulas Mela, is being inaugurated and organized. But what is this? Now, talking about the Ulas Mela, this pertains to expanding the skills and educational level of artisans in India, to promote vocational art and craft in India, and it has been inaugurated and organized under the Union Minister of Education and Skill Development. And in this regard, let's quickly have a look at the question itself. It says Sustainable Development Goal 4 is related to which of the following? A says clean water and sanitation for all. Well, clean water and sanitation for all is pertaining to Sustainable Development Goal 6. So therefore, it cannot be the right answer. Talking about B, urgent action to combat or fight climate change and its impacts. This pertains to Sustainable Development Goal 13 and once again is not right. C, healthy lives and well-being for all people across all age groups globally. That pertains to SDG 3. Again invalid. So D will be the correct answer because D talks about Sustainable Development Goal number 4 of promoting fair, equitable and quality education to everybody across the globe to create better inclusion in formal education, making D your valid answer. Now with this, we jump to a PYQ that has been picked up from 2020 for you. The PYQ talks about Indian Constitution. It says which part of the Constitution of India declares the ideal of welfare state. Now we know that India is strongly committed right from initiating the Bombay Plan for creating a socialistic democracy, for creating a society which has utmost distributive justice. In this regard, the options are A, directive principles of state policy, B, fundamental rights, C, preamble of the Constitution, and D, the 7th schedule of the Constitution. Now clearly, here A is the right answer. Because when we talk about directive principles of state policy, let's remember that back in 1945, the Sapru Committee had suggested 2 categories of individual rights. One were known as justiciable rights, which could be justified through any court of law. These became fundamental rights. That's part 3 of the Constitution. But there was another category of rights which this committee spoke about, but these were non-justiciable or injusticiable rights, and these became the directive principles of state policy. Directive principles of state policy pertain to Part 4 of the Indian Constitution, and it deals with Articles 36 to 51 of the Constitution. The intention is to promote a welfare state. The intention is to create a state where there is no bias or injustice against any particular individual or community of people, and hence A will be the correct answer. Now let's also remember that the concept of directive principles of state policy was initially taken from the Spanish Constitution. From there, it was imbibed in the Irish Constitution and into Indian Constitution through the Irish Constitution. Now let's look at B for a second. B talks about fundamental rights. Indeed, fundamental rights are a set of rights, but under the Article 32 of the Constitution, these rights can be claimed, and in case any citizen is deprived of the fundamental rights, then the person can go to the court and get them justified. So therefore, fundamental rights refer to Part 3 of the Constitution, specifically from Articles 12 to 35, talking about the preamble. Now that's the key, or it's like the preface to the Indian Constitution, which often talks about how India is a sovereign, socialist, democratic, secular country. So therefore, C in this context is not correct. And talking about option D, 7th schedule. So 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution talks about allocation or distribution of powers and functions between the central government, the union government, and the state governments. With this, we can now proceed with the interesting fact of the day, and we are going to talk about multidimensional poverty. This topic has been taken because recently when the government announced the interim budget, the finance ministry proudly claimed that in India, the multidimensional poverty has actually been reduced. It has come down from 29.1% back in 2013-14 period to 11.28% only in 2022-2023 period. This means that more than 24 crore Indians were actually able to escape multidimensional poverty. So that's an interesting piece of news that has also attracted a lot of questions and speculations among policy makers. But what do we mean by multidimensional poverty? Now remember that this concept states that poverty is not just about income deprivation, because when you say poverty is about lack of income or access to resources, you are only counting the economic dimension of poverty. When in reality, poverty is a bigger word. It is about deprivation of social opportunities. And therefore, it's a very broad word. Income poverty is just a small aspect of multidimensional poverty. In this regard, the concept of multidimensional poverty came from the Global Multidimensional Poverty Report, which is published together by the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative along with United Nations Development Programme. Now this index, which is known as Multidimensional Poverty Index or the MPI or MDPI, it tries to measure various aspects of poverty that marginalized segments of people face. It is much beyond income or consumption. The ultimate aim is to promote the target of Sustainable Development Goal 1.2, which says creating a world where rapidly we have to reduce poverty among the global communities. And in this regard, let's also remember that the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, it operates by calculating and monitoring at least 12 indicators. These 12 indicators are spread across various dimensions, from the lack of access to quality concrete housing, to a lack of banking services, to lack of sanitation, clean, hygienic drinking water, to a lack of healthcare, education, employment. It also talks about the lack of sometimes access to vaccination among children, as well as it talks about the high rate of maternal, child and adolescent mortality rate. It also includes, in fact, access to clean energy or clean fuel. So therefore, it's a very broad term. To measure it more systematically, these 12 criteria are summed into 3 indicators which span across health, education and standard of living. And these together are added, calculated by using a method that's known as Alkire-Foster method or the AF methodology. And now let's remember that in India as well, inspired by the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, the Niti Aayog started creating its own Global Multidimensional Poverty Index. The first edition was released back in 2021. It made a very alarming confession. It said that in India, poverty is not just multidimensional, but it also cuts across gender, caste and tribe identities. Why? Because according to the 2021 Global MDPI, in India, out of every 6 multidimensionally poor people, more than 4 inherently hailed from either the lower caste backgrounds or the scheduled tribal backgrounds or the OBC backgrounds. So this was a major eye-opener as to how social stratifications or social differentiations sometimes determine the economic level of a particular community. And on that note, I would also quickly remind you that we shall come back with another set of interesting questions. And for now, I'll take your leave. Thank you so much for attending today's session.